What if the most dangerous revolution in the galaxy didn't look like a war at all, but like paperwork being quietly filed on time? It's a strange thought, isn't it? Isn't it? You're taught to spot power in loud things. Fleets, weapons, ultimatums. Fleets, weapons, ultimatums. But what if real leverage lies in the boring parts? No one reads the fine print on fuel depots, the ownership of navigation beacons, the clauses that only trigger after a moral breach. It really makes you wonder how much of your life already runs on systems you never voted for, just because they felt normal. In this story, an interstellar protection cartel has spent centuries taxing every main route between the stars. People call it safety, they call it tradition, they call it necessary. Humans have smiled, signed, paid, and quietly built something else under the surface. Not a rebellion with guns, but a countdown made of contracts and patience, waiting for one unforgivable mistake. That mistake happens above a peaceful ocean world named Pelagia. When a demonstration strike meant to scare a colony into paying on time kills 32 people instead. So, settle in and let your mind drift with this, while the Aegis coalition looks for threats in shipyards and battle plans. You're going to watch power move in tribunals, trust documents, and soft-spoken meetings. You'll stand beside Ambassador Evelyn Shaw, who never raises her voice, Dr. Caleb Park, who fights with asset maps instead of guns, and Envoy Raal Sith, who arrives certain nothing important can change, until the countdown starts and the toll roads of the galaxy quietly stop being the only way through the dark. The story you are about to hear is very quiet on the surface. There are no huge battles, no burning worlds, no heroes shouting in fear or rage. Instead, there is time. There is law. There is careful planning done in patient cities, under calm skies, and in slow orbits around old familiar rocks. For centuries, the Aegis coalition has watched over the main paths between stars. It has called this service protection, and has taken a regular price for it, a steady tithe that every new colony has been told is normal and wise. Most people have grown up thinking this is simply how the galaxy must work, the same way people long ago thought tolls on roads and bridges were just part of travel. Humans have seemed to accept this system more quietly than most. They have sent ambassadors, signed contracts, paid fees, and attended endless hearings. To many in the coalition, humans look soft, patient to a fault, too slow to resist, too busy building gardens and quiet ports to cause real trouble. But patience can hide something deeper. While the coalition has watched for fleets and guns and loud revolts, it has not looked as closely at who owns fuel depots, who maintains navigation beacons, who runs the tiny legal trusts that sit behind major trade routes. It has not noticed how often the names on those records are human, or how carefully those names tie back to each other. This is a story about a galaxy that thinks it is stable, and about a species that uses calm tools to change that balance without war. It is a story of contracts and kindness, of a long countdown that no censor can see, and of a new kind of safety that no empire can claim as property. You will move close to 3 minds during this shift. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw, who holds her anger like a still lake. Dr. Caleb Park, who sits among screens in quiet cities and sends small signals at the right moments. And Ral Sith, an envoy of the Aegis coalition, who arrives in human space fully certain that nothing important can change. By the time the lanterns of a new grid light up the dark between stars, the old toll roads will still be there. They will simply matter far less than they used to. By the late 27th century, the inner solar system had settled into a deep, steady calm. From orbit, Earth looked soft and green again, with old scars from storms and rising seas now healed under new forests and floating wetlands. In this gentle cradle, cities like Washington, D.C., Houston, and Seattle had turned into places of planning rather than struggle. Their skylines were not sharp with towers meant to impress, but smooth with gardens, small domes, and clusters of low, bright buildings where people still met face to face. Above them, the Aegis coalition's roots glowed as thin lines of ordered light. Ships moved along these paths, the way cars once moved along highways, guided by navigation, beacons, and watched by patrol craft that flew without hurry. On every major transfer, a simple reminder pulsed through the mesh. Protection tithe due, cycle 84.93. The message was never harsh, never loud. It was like a regular bill for water or power, something nobody loved yet almost everyone had learned to accept. The protection tithe had grown slowly from an old promise, long before, when early human ships had first pushed out toward nearby stars. Pirates and warlords still stalked loose lanes between systems. Aegis patrols had stepped in, bringing strict law and quick help. In return, colonies had agreed to pay with minerals, food, and later with credits. The bargain had begun as a way to survive. Over centuries it had hardened into a habit, then into a rule, and finally into something closer to a tax. For small colonies, the tithe could hurt. 1/10 of fuel, 1/10 of trade. Profit flowed outward every cycle. Yet the system stayed calm because the coalition sold safety. Like a soft blanket, its spokespeople used gentle words and careful charts that showed risk without them. They said that pirates had faded only because of Aegis patrols, and that without steady funding, danger would return. Risk, they said, did not sleep. Protection had to be constant. On Sears, that logic played out in a daily dance of quiet checks and transfers. The Ceres trade hub, a vast human-run station suspended above the dwarf planet's pale surface, served as a node where coalition rules and human habits met. From the outside, the station looked like a balanced wheel, with long spokes of docks reaching out toward passing ships. The inner ring held gardens, markets, and a wide, clear-walled hall where envoys met under a slow, artificial sunrise. When Ral Sith arrived at Ceres, the local time was set to a calm mid-morning. The envoy's shuttle slid along a reserved corridor. guided in by beacons that spoke in tight bursts of math and shared signals. Raoul watched the approach from behind the shuttle's curved glass, long fingers resting lightly on the armrail, twin hearts beating with the slow, even rhythm trained for public duty. Humans came into view along the docking edge, moving in steady lines, never rushed, never still. Some wore simple station coveralls, while others walked in soft formal suits marked by small precise badges. A few carried plants in clear cases, bright leaves reflecting station light. Still so quiet, Raoul said to the assistant seated nearby. The assistant, a small figure from a different Aegis species, tilted its head in agreement. Human space has remained stable for 12.7 cycles, it said in a clear, flat tone. No major security events reported. Tithe compliance at 99.4%. Minor disputes resolved by standard tribunal processes. Rail watched a group of children pass under a set of wide viewports, their faces turned toward the stars, their movements unhurried. They learn the lanes early, Raoul said. Yet they do not push for control. Curious, many species that master navigation seek to command it. Humans seem content to rent it. The shuttle docked with a soft shudder. Air equalized with a gentle hiss. Raoul adjusted the formal sash, checked the small device at the belt that carried agenda notes and treaty points, and stepped into Ceres gravity with a smooth, practiced stride. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw waited in the reception hall, hands loosely folded at her waist. Her suit was simple, dark, cut with clean lines that fell almost like water. A small pin on her collar showed an old Earth symbol of balance. A set of equal arms holding a level beam. "Envoy Raoul Sith," she said, voice warm but measured. "Welcome to Ceres and to the inner lanes of human trade." Raoul noted the slight bow of her head, just deep enough to honor Aegis rank, not so deep as to imply subservience. It was the exact angle taught in coalition etiquette for friendly equal with minor differences, a detail that Raoul filed away with mild approval. "Ambassador Shaw," Raoul answered, "it is a pleasure to be in your space again. Your routes remain some of the most reliable within the coalition net." Evelyn smiled in a way that seemed almost absent, as if part of her mind had drifted elsewhere and returned just in time. "Reliability keeps families fed and ships on schedule," she said. "We have found that drama is bad for cargo." That line drew light laughter from the small crowd of aides and staff nearby. Raoul let the corners of the mouth curl in polite response, then turned as Evelyn led the group along the hall. Transparent walls showed the slow spin of the station. Outside, with tugs guiding bulk carriers toward docking clamps. As they walked, displays along the inner wall streamed calm charts. Tithe payments ticked across in fine print. Each line a set of numbers that matched a cargo load, a mining haul, or a trade jump. Here and there, small icons marked pre-cleared by human trust or joint-owned asset, auto-compliant. To most eyes, these lines were simple proofs that the station worked smoothly within Aegis rules. Rahl had little reason to think otherwise. The Coalition had long viewed human legal habits as dull but useful, a kind of constant background hum that made things easier for everyone. Humans formed trusts, boards, co-ops, and civic alliances the way some species grew algae farms. They loved rules and forms and detailed minutes. They seemed to settle conflict, not by force, but by long, patient meetings. Your trusts continue to manage a large share of support assets, Rahl remarked, pointing to a small symbol beside a fuel depot line. An efficient use of local knowledge, I assume. Evelyn glanced at the display, then back at Rahl. We build things to last, she said. Sometimes that means laws that go on working for centuries after the people who signed them are gone. As long as they keep stations and depots alive, we see no reason to change them. They stepped into a larger chamber where a three-dimensional map of nearby space hung in the air. Slowly turning, bright routes marked the main Aegis lanes, curving between Sol, Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, Pelagia's blue star, and a spread of other points. Thinner lines in a softer color showed secondary paths that did not carry full patrol coverage, but still received some attention. The toll road of the galaxy, Evelyn said, looking up at the map with calm eyes. Every main path under careful watch, every major turn, marked every traveler, counted, a system that keeps you safe, Rahl added. Your colonies enjoy some of the lowest attack rates per jump in Coalition history. This is not an accident. It is the result of steady patrols and shared cost. Evelyn's gaze lingered on a small set of dimmer lines, almost lost under the brighter Aegis routes. People used to pay to cross bridges on Earth, she said. They will simply matter far less than they used to. By the late 27th century, the inner solar system had settled into a deep, steady calm. From orbit, Earth looked soft and green again, with old scars from storms and rising seas now healed under new forests and floating wetlands. In this gentle cradle, cities like Washington, D.C., Houston, and Seattle had turned into places of planning rather than struggle. Their skylines were not sharp with towers meant to impress, but smooth with gardens, small domes, and clusters of low, bright buildings where people still met face to face. Above them, the Aegis Coalition's routes glowed as thin lines of ordered light. Ships moved along these paths, the way cars once moved along highways, guided by navigation beacons and watched by patrol craft that flew without hurry. On every major transfer, a simple reminder pulsed through the mesh. Protection tithe due. Cycle 84.93. The message was never harsh, never loud. It was like a regular bill for water or power, something nobody loved yet almost everyone had learned to accept. The protection tithe had grown slowly from an old promise, long before, when early human ships had first pushed out toward nearby stars. Pirates and warlords still stalked loose lanes between systems. Aegis patrols had stepped in, bringing strict law and quick help. In return, colonies had agreed to pay with minerals, food, and later with credits. The bargain had begun as a way to survive. Over centuries, it had hardened into a habit. Then, into a rule, and finally into something closer to a tax. For small colonies, the tithe could hurt. A tenth of fuel, a tenth of trade profit flowed outward every cycle. Yet the system stayed calm because the coalition sold safety like a soft blanket. Its spokespeople used gentle words and careful charts that showed risk without them. They said that pirates had faded only because of Aegis patrols, and that without steady funding, danger would return. Risk, they said, did not sleep. Protection had to be constant. On seas, that logic played out in a daily dance of quiet checks and transfers. The Ceres Trade Hub, a vast human-run station suspended above the dwarf planet's pale surface, served as a node where coalition rules and human habits met. From the outside, the station looked like a balanced wheel, with long spokes of docks reaching out toward passing ships. The inner ring held gardens, markets, and a wide, clear-walled hall where envoys met under a slow, artificial sunrise. When Ral Sith arrived at Ceres, the local time was set to a calm mid-morning. The envoy's shuttle slid along a reserved corridor, guided in by beacons that spoke in tight bursts of math and shared signals. R'hllor watched the approach from behind the shuttle's curved glass. Long fingers resting lightly on the arm rail, twin hearts beating with the slow, even rhythm trained for public duty. Humans came into view along the docking edge, moving in steady lines, never rushed, never still. Some wore simple station coveralls while others walked in soft formal suits marked by small, precise badges. A few carried plants in clear cases, bright leaves reflecting station light. "Still so quiet," Ral said to the assistant seated nearby. The assistant, a small figure from a different Aegis species, tilted its head in agreement. Human space has remained stable for 12.7 cycles, it said in a clear, flat tone. No major security events, reported tithe compliance at 99.4%. Minor disputes resolved by standard tribunal processes. Ral watched a group of children pass under a set of wide viewports, their faces turned toward the stars, their movements unhurried. They learn the lanes early, Ral said. Yet they do not push for control. Curious, many species that master navigation seek to command it. Humans seem content to rent it. Air equalized with a gentle hiss. Ral adjusted the formal sash, checked a small device at the belt that carried agenda notes and treaty points, and stepped into Ceres gravity with a smooth, practiced stride. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw waited in the reception hall, hands loosely folded at her waist. Her suit was simple, dark, cut with clean lines that fell almost like water. A small pin on her collar showed an old Earth symbol of balance, a set of equal arms holding a level beam. "Envoy Ral Sith," she said, voice warm but measured. "Welcome to Ceres and to the inner lanes of human trade." Ral noted the slight bow of her head, just deep enough to honor Aegis rank, not so deep as to imply subservience. It was the exact angle taught in coalition etiquette for friendly equal with minor differences, a detail that Ral filed away with mild approval. "Ambassador Shaw," Ral answered. "It is a pleasure to be in your space again." Your routes remain some of the most reliable within the Coalition net. Evelyn smiled in a way that seemed almost absent, as if part of her mind had drifted elsewhere, and returned just in time. Reliability keeps families fed and ships on schedule, she said. We have found that drama is bad for cargo. That line drew light laughter from the small crowd of aides and staff nearby. Rahl let the corners of the mouth curl in polite response, then turned as Evelyn led the group along the hall. Transparent walls showed the slow spin of the station outside, with tugs guiding bulk carriers toward docking clamps. As they walked, displays along the inner wall streamed calm charts. Tithe payments ticked across in fine print, each line a set of numbers that matched a cargo load, a mining haul, or a trade jump. Here and there, small icons marked pre-cleared by human trust or joint-owned asset, auto-compliant. To most eyes, these lines were simple proofs that the station worked smoothly within Aegis rules. Rahl had little reason to think otherwise. The Coalition had long viewed human legal habits as dull but useful, a kind of constant background hum that made things easier for everyone. Humans formed trusts, boards, co-ops, and civic alliances the way some species grew. Algae farms. They loved rules and forms and detailed minutes. They seemed to settle conflict, not by force, but by long, patient meetings. Your trusts continue to manage a large share of support assets, Rahl remarked, pointing to a small symbol beside a fuel depot line. An efficient use of local knowledge, I assume. Evelyn glanced at the display, then back at Rahl. We build things to last, she said. Sometimes that means laws that go on working for centuries after the people who signed them are gone. As long as they keep stations and depots alive, we see no reason to change them. They stepped into a larger chamber where a three-dimensional map of nearby space hung in the air. Slowly turning, bright routes marked the main Aegis lanes, curving between Sol, Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, Pelagius, Blue Star, and a spread of other points. Thinner lines, in a softer color, showed secondary paths that did not carry full patrol coverage, but still received some attention. The toll road of the galaxy, Evelyn said, looking up at the map with calm eyes. Every main path, under careful watch, every major turn, marked every traveler. Counted a system that keeps you safe, Rahl added. Your colonies enjoy some of the lowest attack rates per jump in Coalition history. This is not an accident. It is the result of steady patrols and shared cost. Evelyn's gaze lingered on a small set of dimmer lines, almost lost under the brighter Aegis routes. People used to pay to cross bridges on Earth, she said. Over time, they decided some paths should simply be free, because life was better when everyone could move without fear or gatekeepers. It began with small roads, barely used, not worth fighting over. Rahl studied the same dim lines and saw only minor trade lanes, probably under local agreements with no real strategic value. Your history is full of interesting metaphors, Rahl said. Yet, as you said, change takes time. Our records show that these minor paths have existed for generations without any major shift in tithe policy. True, Evelyn said, her tone light. Her tone light. We are very patient. There was something in the way she said that word that brushed lightly against Raoul's trained sense for tone. It was not a threat, not even a hint of anger. It sounded more like a person talking about a long, slow project at home, perhaps a garden that would not bloom for many seasons. Raoul decided it was simple human pride in persistence. Nothing more. The Council appreciates your people's reliability, Raoul replied, and your willingness to work within shared rules. Many species test limits again and again. Humans seem to prefer gradual influence. Evelyn nodded. We prefer tools that do not need to shout, she said. Hearings, contracts, quiet upgrades. A policy that lasts 100 years matters more than a loud promise that lasts a week. They moved to a side space where a series of recent tribunal logs scrolled past in clean, clear text. Most were small matters. Disputed cargo weights, docking priority conflicts, a minor hull collision in a crowded port. In nearly every case, a human legal team had taken part, not as dramatic prosecutors, but as patient sorters of detail. At times, Raoul said, your teams argue points so small that my staff jokes about it afterward. A decimal error here, a line break timing there. Yet the rulings usually go in your favor because you are simply more prepared. We study the rules we agree to, Evelyn said, running a finger along one of the panels as it scrolled. When a system shapes almost every part of life between stars, it deserves careful reading. We call it self-respect. Raoul considered that answer as the group paused beside a viewport. Below, the dwarf planet's pale face curved away, marked by mines that shone like faint rings of light. Ships moved in patient arcs between surface and station, guided by signals Raoul's eyes could not see. To the Coalition, human space had always seemed easy to manage. They paid on time. They signed treaties. They rarely raised fleets in anger. Their protests came in the form of long, dense petitions instead of sudden strikes. If they had ever thought of real rebellion, it had passed quietly and left no scars on the main lanes. Raoul watched a tug drift past and felt a small, relaxed confidence. Of all the sectors to oversee, human systems remained among the least troublesome. The protection tithe here flowed like a calm tide. Patrols logged few incidents. The toll roads were smooth. Behind that calm, small details continued their steady work. Old trusts renewed ownership of obscure fuel depots at the exact legal moment required. Minor beacons along barely used paths received upgrades paid for by funds that traced back to human cooperatives, not Aegis accounts. Contracts scheduled for review in some distant year were quietly extended by automatic clauses that almost nobody noticed. Patience in human hands had never been surrender. It was a kind of long breathing while pieces lined up across centuries. But for now, in the bright, ordered halls of Ceres, almost no one outside human circles saw that shape. Shall we review the upcoming tithe adjustments for Pelagia? And the outer water worlds? Rahl asked, turning back toward the inner rooms. Evelyn gave a slow, easy nod. Yes, she said. Let us talk about Pelagia. Her eyes, for a brief second, seemed to hold the color of deep water under a still sky, hiding currents far below. Then she smiled again, polite and calm, and led the envoy toward a meeting that looked from the outside exactly like every quiet session that had come before. Pelagia hung in space like a living drop of ocean, a deep blue world wrapped in soft cloud bands and streaks of silver storms. From orbit, there were no continents to break the surface, only endless water moving in slow, massive patterns. Floating cities drifted along these currents, linked by long tension cables and sleek surface vessels that left gentle foam trails behind them. Life on Pelagia moved at the pace of waves. Residents timed work by tide schedules and wind predictions more than by artificial clocks. Homes were built in rounded clusters that flexed with swells instead of fighting them. Light filtered through layers of water and structure, giving many rooms a soft, shifting glow that reminded older settlers of sunlight through leaves on Earth. Above the surface, the orbital refinery circled in a calm, precise path. It drew heavy elements and rare compounds from deep ocean extraction platforms, then processed them into compact forms for shipment along the Aegis lanes. Pipes and storage rings wrapped the station in a slow-turning halo, while tug drones moved like careful insects around its frame. For Pelagia, the refinery was more than a machine. It was the colony's main link to wider trade, its way of turning rich but distant resources into ships, medicine, and tools. People told stories about the station the way small towns once talked about the rail line that came through only twice a day. Children grew up knowing someone who had worked a shift there, either in person or through remote rigs. The Aegis Coalition saw Pelagia as a reliable contributor, if not particularly important. The colony paid its tithe on time in most cycles, with only minor delays when storms disrupted extraction runs. Notices would go out, polite and firm, reminding local councils of their obligations. So far, no serious penalty had ever been needed. When a delay stretched a little longer than usual in cycle 84.93, it did not seem urgent at first. A series of deep storms had rolled through Pelagia's equatorial zone, where several extraction platforms sat anchored. Waves had risen taller than towers, winds had cut through support rigs, and a few cables had snapped under strain. Repairs were underway, but cargo loads had fallen behind schedule, and Targos had fallen behind schedule. Pelagia's council sent full reports, with clear timestamps and sensor logs. They explained the damage, listed repair crews, and even attached short messages from workers apologizing for the delay. They promised that shipments would resume within 2 local weeks, and that the missed tithe share would be folded into the next cycle. In a calmer time, this would have been enough, but across Aegis space, quiet tensions had been building. A few outer colonies had begun to question the tithe openly, sharing charts that showed how much value flowed to the coalition compared to what came back. On another spiral arm, a minor skirmish with an unaffiliated group had forced Aegis patrols to stretch their coverage thin. Some in the council had started to worry that the idea of protection might seem weaker if tithes began to slip, even by small amounts. During a closed session, a senior security advisor suggested a familiar tactic. A demonstration strike, she said, her crest flattening in a show of calm logic, a controlled shot near an asset, with no loss of life, only minor damage. It will remind Pelagia and nearby systems that obligations are serious. Without risking full conflict, demonstration strikes were part of Aegis history. Old tools used when charts and polite letters failed. They were meant to be careful, almost theatrical. A bright, controlled beam skimmed a platform's outer hull or nearby asteroid, just close enough to leave scorch marks and rattled nerves. After that, local councils usually found a way to pay faster. Pelagia was chosen because it seemed safe. The colony was peaceful, deeply tied to human systems, and known for leaders who preferred compromise. A short, sharp lesson there, some argued, would carry through gentle trade networks in human space and tighten compliance elsewhere. All without open war, the strike plan moved forward with calm, exact steps. A patrol ship on the edge of Pelagia's jurisdiction received sealed orders. The target would be an unmanned storage wing attached to the orbital refinery, a section currently marked as low occupancy on station maps. Safety checks showed no scheduled shifts in that wing at the chosen time. The beam intensity was set to cause a vivid flare and structural pitting, but not full breach. In a control room on the patrol ship, officers ran through simulations. All showed minor damage and no casualties. Monitors displayed a bright arc of light across empty metal, then swift cooling. The chief officer signed off with a steady hand. The orders felt routine, almost dull. On Pelagia, however, reality moved with its own timing. The storms that had battered the ocean platforms had also rattled the refinery's schedule. To prevent a backlog, a small crew had volunteered for an extra shift in the low-use wing, checking seals and realigning storage clamps. Their presence had not been updated in the general Aegis traffic logs yet. Local systems knew they were there. Central Coalition lists did not. So when the patrol ship aligned its weapon for the demonstration strike, its model still assumed an empty section. The ship fired at the planned moment, not in anger, but in calculated display. A bright, clean beam lanced across the dark and met the refinery's outer ring. For a breathless instant, it looked exactly like the simulations. Metal flared, surface panels scorched, and warning lights jumped to red along the targeted arc. Then an unexpected chain of changes began. A support strut, weakened earlier by microfractures from the storms, gave way more sharply than expected. The force traveled into a neighboring segment where pressure had been raised to test a new storage seal. Alarm surged through the wing. Inside, the small human crew felt the station shudder under their feet. One worker grabbed a handhold as light shifted from soft blue to harsh amber, then to the deep, urgent red, usually reserved for drills. The floor tilted. A line of storage pods shimmied against their restraints. Control, "This is Wing 19, a technician called out over local comms, voice tight. We are reading external impact and internal strain beyond earlier storm damage. Are we under attack?" On the patrol ship, sensors now picked up life signs where there should have been none. The chief officer stared at the display in shock. "Cease fire," she ordered. But there had been only a single planned shot. The damage had already been done. The refinery tried to compensate. Emergency seals slid into place. Firebreak barriers started to move. But movement cost time, and some forces move faster than steel plates on rails. A storage pod broke loose, slammed into a support frame, and cracked. Pressurized gas burst out in a hard, hot wave, rolling across the wing. From the surface of Pelagia, people saw a sudden bright flare in the sky. Where the refinery traced its usual calm path, families on floating platforms turned their faces upward. Some thought at first it was an unusual light dimmed and flickered, and a cold fear spread across the waves. By the time full control returned, 32 people were dead. 47 were injured, some with burns, some with impacts from flying debris, some from sudden exposure to vacuum before emergency fields snapped into place. The damaged wing would take months to fully repair. The Coalition's official report called it an unintended collateral event during a measured demonstration action. The language was tidy, almost gentle. It framed the strike as a tool meant to correct payment timing, not as an attack. It listed the storm damage and data lag as unfortunate factors, and it expressed deep regret at the loss of life. On Pelagia, the words landed like stones. Families held small circles of light on the floating platforms, candles and glow orbs, bending in the sea breeze. Recordings of the dead played in shared spaces, showing faces laughing in ordinary moments just weeks before. The colony council sat in a long, low hall that swayed softly with the waves, listening to quiet cries from gathered relatives. Anger rose, but it did not burst into riots or rushed calls for war. Instead, it settled into something heavier and more steady. People began to ask, in simple, direct speech, why a demonstration had been aimed at their vital station in the first place. They asked why a price had needed such a display at all, if the system was truly based on consent and mutual help. In Washington, D.C., Evelyn Shaw received the first full brief in a tree-lined compound where the buildings blended into terraces of greenery. She read the report in silence, eyes moving calmly across the text. A screen beside her showed Pelagia's ocean, still and wide, under passing clouds. As she reached the casualty list, her jaw tightened for just a second, then eased again. An aide nearby watched her. With a kind of careful respect, "The council will expect a strong response," the aide said quietly. "Many will push for sanctions, perhaps even for a military show of strength. It might be a chance to change the tithe terms through pressure." Evelyn closed the report and looked out toward a small pond where water plants floated under the late afternoon sun. "There will be a response," she said, "but it will not be loud." In Houston and Seattle, Messages began to flow between legal teams, trade boards, and system planners. Doctor Son messages. Caleb Park sat in a high room surrounded by screens that displayed traffic charts, contract maps, and asset ownership webs. The news from Pelagia sat at the center of his display, a red circle around the refinery icon. He read the technical breakdowns, the pattern of force lines, the failure points. He studied the way the coalition had scheduled a demonstration strike, and he noted how narrow their data view had been. He also pulled up an old file stored under a simple, mild name, long-term optionality measures. Inside that file sat a structure of clauses, ownership trees, and timed triggers built over generations. Assets controlled by human trusts could shift status under certain conditions. Written in calm legal language, some of those conditions had just been met. Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not call for fleets. He sent a short, secure signal to Evelyn and to a small circle of trusted coordinators. The message contained only 3 words and a timestamp. Countdown condition reached. A few hours later, Evelyn sat before a wide band of cameras and remote projection links addressing both human systems and the Aegis Council. Her tone was level, her posture relaxed but firm. Behind her, the background showed not warships but images of Pelagia's waves and the faces of the 32 dead. Envoys of the Aegis Coalition, she began, and citizens of every connected world. Pelagia has suffered a devastating loss of life from an action that was meant in your own words as a display of power to correct payment timing. 32 people who lived and worked in peace are gone. 47 more lie hurt. The refinery they kept alive has been damaged for months to come. She paused, letting the silence sit. Somewhere in Aegis space, Raal Sith watched from a council chamber, eyes fixed on the human ambassador's calm face. In past centuries, Evelyn continued, humans might have answered such an act with war or with a clumsy embargo. We will not do that. Instead, we request a full tribunal, under your own rules, with open access to every log, every order, every sensor trace related to this demonstration strike. Raal glanced at nearby council members. A tribunal was normal enough, safe within Aegis procedures. Many seemed relieved that the human response sounded so measured. In that tribunal, Evelyn said, we will ask for accountability, not only for this accident, but for the policy that made such a display seem acceptable at all. We will ask you to examine whether a protection tithe that must be enforced with weapons can still call itself protection, or whether it has become something closer to tribute. Her voice did not climb. It did not shake. It flowed like a slow, steady current. While we wait for your agreement, she added, I am activating what our internal documents have called the countdown. At this word, a faint shift ran through the council chamber where Raal sat. People adjusted in their seats. A few translators whispered clarifications to representatives who did not know the term. Raal's hand tightened slightly on the table. The countdown is not a weapon, Evelyn said. It is a schedule. It is a timed release of rights and responsibilities that have been held in trust across our systems for many generations. It will run according to rules already filed, with your own registries under names you have seen so often that they became invisible. Now some council members frowned. Legal aides began checking databases. Search terms lit up alongside panels. In 10 cycles, Evelyn went on. Certain fuel depots will shift to a use model that does not require tithes. In 20, key navigation beacons along minor routes will open under free access terms, with safety protocols maintained by mixed species boards, rather than by Aegis alone. In 30, a network of shelters, medical depots, and trade nodes will come online under what we call the Lantern Grid, ready to serve any traveler who chooses not to pay into coercive systems. She folded her hands on the table. None of this requires a single shot. None of it breaks your written law. Every step uses options you agreed to long ago, when you allowed local trusts and boards to manage certain assets for mutual benefit. Rael felt a slow, unfamiliar unease. This did not sound like a sudden, emotional backlash. It sounded like a plan that had been waiting for a line to be crossed. "We invite you," Evelyn said, "to meet us in Tribunal, to look honestly at what happened above Pelagia and why. We will bring our evidence. We will bring our contracts. We will bring our patience." She looked straight into the feed, as if meeting every viewer's eyes. The countdown has begun. How it ends is still a matter of choice. Our choice. The choice of every colony that moves goods and people between stars. The feed ended without music, without slogans, just a fade back to Pelagia's calm ocean, waves rolling on under a sky that held a damaged ring of metal. In the Aegis Council chamber, a tight, low discussion broke out. Some called the human move a bluff, a legal stunt that could be contained. Others pointed to the long reach of human trusts and co-ops inside. Ral Sith sat very still, replaying every visit to human stations in personal memory. The dull legal charts, the quiet meetings, the rows of contracts humans had asked to file with Aegis registries, always complete, always tidy. None of it had looked dangerous. It had looked, if anything, boring. Now, for the first time, Rael began to wonder what else had been built under that calm surface. What plans had soaked up centuries of human patience, waiting not for rage, but for a moral line as clear as the scorch mark on Pelagia's sky. On Ceres, Caleb Park watched routes start to flicker as traders quietly considered new options. On Pelagia, families sat by the sea, holding hands in silence, trusting that their pain would not be spent on another cycle of loud threats and short wars. The galaxy had been treated as a toll road for a very long time. With a single deadly mistake, called a demonstration, the Aegis Coalition had given humans all the reason they needed to stop accepting that as the only path forward. The Tribunal did not start at once. Nothing in Aegis law ever moved that fast. There were notices to send, panels to form, jurisdictions to argue over. Some members of the council wanted the case kept narrow, focused only on the technical causes of the Pelagia accident. Others wanted a wider frame that would cover demonstration strikes in general. Endless memos crossed the mesh, full of careful words meant to give the appearance of motion, while real decisions waited. To most people, these delays felt like more of the same. Victims' families on Pelagia grew tired of bland messages about procedural steps. Commentators in human space argued on calm programs about whether the tribunal would matter at all. Some said the coalition would bury the issue in study groups until anger cooled. Others said humans would accept another formal apology and move on. While those voices filled public channels, a different kind of motion had already begun in the background. It did not show up as rallies or riots. It appeared instead as small changes in ownership lists, route choices, and station agreements, each one quiet on its own, but together forming a slow tide. In Seattle, rain traced steady lines down the tall windows of a planning room where Dr. Caleb Park sat among his screens. The city below glowed with gentle light under shifting clouds, its harbor calm, its sky routes organized but not crowded. From this room, the outside world looked peaceful, almost sleepy. Inside the room, data flowed in dense layers. One wall held a live map of Aegis space with main routes marked in strong white lines. Overlaid on that, in softer colors, Caleb had drawn paths controlled or strongly influenced by human trusts. Tiny symbols marked fuel depots, comm relays, shelter stations, and repair docks that did not sit fully under Aegis operation, even though they lay within official coalition reach. Another display showed contracts sorted by trigger conditions. Long, dry texts that had been signed centuries ago highlighted themselves in quiet alerts whenever the terms linked to the countdown. Many of those contracts lived under dull names like Mutual Maintenance, Framework Addendum, or Docking Access Harmonization Clause. Some had been renewed so often that even Aegis clerks had stopped thinking about them. Caleb moved through this field of agreements with patient care. His fingers slid across surfaces, bringing up one legal trust after another. He did not rush. This plan had already waited through lifetimes. A few extra hours now would not change the outcome, but a single careless error could give Aegis attorneys the crack they needed. A secure line pulsed at the edge of his view. It carried Evelyn Shaw's signature from Washington. Caleb, her voice came, steady and clear. The council has agreed to form the Tribunal. They are trying to limit its scope, but they cannot avoid it now. We have our opening. Caleb nodded, even though she could not see him directly through the encrypted channel. Good, he said. By the time the first hearing starts, several of our triggers will have matured. Some are on simple time schedules. Others depend on your announcement having been logged. That has already happened. Any sign of active pushback on the contracts? Evelyn asked. Aegis legal teams are searching, Caleb replied. I see increased queries on trust registries and asset chains. But there is not much they can change quickly. Most of these structures sit inside their own law. Unwinding them would require consent from boards that are not under their direct control, and many of those boards are already aligned with us. He pulled up a cluster of dots on the map, each representing a mid-sized fuel depot near a junction between Aegis main lanes and secondary human paths. As of 4 hours ago, he continued, 37 depots have shifted pricing models for registered Lantern Grid contributors. They still serve Aegis-aligned ships, but the cost is slightly higher there, and the credit terms are less friendly. Evelyn caught the meaning at once. So a trader who is not tied to the tithe we'll start to see real savings, she said. Not huge at first, but enough to feel. Exactly, Caleb said. We are not shutting doors. We are simply opening another and making it a little easier to walk through. He switched feeds, pulling in updates from Houston and other coordination centers. In a calm office overlooking old launch pads turned into parks, a team there had been guiding small route adjustments. Nothing dramatic. A minor cargo line that once stopped only at pure Aegis ports now added a quick pause at a human trust station. A medical supplies service changed its main warehouse from a coalition hub to a joint-owned facility under a lantern grid charter. To shippers, these moves looked like smart business choices. The joint-owned station offered lower storage fees. The lantern-aligned warehouse provided better emergency support terms in case of local disease or disaster. Contracts did not forbid such choices. Aegis law had been built on the assumption that more options proved the fairness of the system. Now those options were starting to have a different flavor. In the Tribunal's preparation rooms, the mood was not calm at all. Aegis staff sensed that something more than a simple accident review was taking shape, even if they could not yet see the full design. Raal Sith walked through a narrow corridor toward the main chamber. Legal advisors on either side. Panels along the walls showed floating screens of case law. Words like precedent, jurisdiction, and liability flashed by in both Aegis Common and dozens of species' native scripts. You appear distracted, Envoy said. One of the advisors, a slight figure with sharp dark eyes. Our argument will rely heavily on the fact that the Pelagia strike followed standard procedure and that the death toll, while tragic, resulted from data lag beyond reasonable control. Rael's jaw tightened at the word reasonable. Since Pelagia, that word had started to feel empty. The procedure itself is under question, Raal said. Ambassador Shaw has made that clear. She will not stop at technical blame. She will ask why a procedure allows weapons to be used at all for debt reminders. The advisor spread 3 hands in a small, rueful gesture. Our law accepts demonstration strikes. Previous tribunals have ruled them legal under certain circumstances. We only need to show that those conditions were met. And the countdown? Raal asked quietly. Your research teams, have they made progress? The advisor frowned. We know that many human trusts and co-ops have placed clauses in our registries that alter control of assets under various triggers. Some depend on a formal claim of coercion. Some depend on a certain level of documented harm. Others refer to broad terms like moral breach, which are harder to pin down. Raal thought of Evelyn's calm face as she had spoken that word. Countdown. How many of those clauses are active now? Raal asked. We cannot say with certainty, the advisor admitted. Our access to some trust records is limited by our own privacy protections. We assumed that would serve us by keeping local politics from spilling into wider disputes. Now that same shield works in favor of human boards and councils. Raal felt something like respect mixed with unease. Humans had used Aegis values, local autonomy, distributed management, respect for old agreements, against a coalition's wish for tight control. And they had done it slowly, without noise. Over centuries, In Washington, Evelyn prepared her opening statement for the tribunal. She sat in a room with soft light and walls lined by plants, not by weapons or flags. 3 screens showed different angles of the tribunal chamber that would appear in projection. Another displayed updates from Caleb and other coordinators. A young staffer stood nearby with a slate full of draft lines. "Ambassador," the staffer said, "some of the counselors from other species suggest a more emotional appeal. They think it might help to show grief more directly. It could sway neutral members." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "Grief is real," she said, "and I will not hide it. But we are not here to beg for pity. We are here to show a better path and to make clear that we have already started walking it." She tapped a line in her speech where she mentioned the lantern grid. "They must understand that we are not asking for permission to build this network," she went on. "We have already built much of it within their own rules. The tribunal is not about whether we may do so. It is about whether they will stay part of a system that many will begin to leave." The tribunal's first day opened with formal grace. The chamber's domed ceiling showed a shifting image of neutral space. No star, no world, just deep dark with tiny points of light. Delegates sat in a ring, each with their cultural marks, each with their own idea of justice. Raoul took a seat at the Aegis bench, breathing carefully. Evelyn's image appeared across from the council, lifelike and clear, her presence carried by tight beam links from Earth. Representatives from Pelagia joined as well, their faces lined not only by sorrow, but also by the drawn look of people who had watched weeks of slow repair and uncertain supply. The first hours focused on facts. Charts showed the path of the demonstration strike, the condition of the refinery, the data lag between Pelagia's local crew updates, and the Aegis central logs. Experts from several species gave dry testimony about structural stress, sensor range, and beam control. Evelyn listened closely, asking precise questions where needed. She did not interrupt with speeches. She let the coalition's own process bring every detail into the light, letting the chamber see how a system that called itself careful had still allowed a weapon to be fired at a living station with incomplete data. Only after that picture was clear did she shift the frame. "You have shown," she said, turning to the presiding counselor, "that this accident came from an old practice used to punish payment delays. You have not yet shown why such a practice should exist at all in a system that claims to be based on cooperation." A murmur ran through the chamber. The presiding counselor tried to keep the focus narrow. "Ambassador Shaw, we are here to address the incident, not to rewrite every policy." "With respect," Evelyn replied, "the incident is the natural result of that policy. If we do not examine the roots, we will simply count bodies and wait for the next flare in somebody else's sky." She brought up a new set of displays drawn from Aegis' own historical files. They showed records of past demonstration strikes, some of which had also caused deaths or lasting damage, even if at a smaller scale than Pelagia. "Is this truly protection?" she asked quietly, "or is it enforcement of tribute under a softer name?" Raoul watched the faces around the ring. Some were angry at the challenge. Some were thoughtful. A few seemed openly uneasy as they saw their own past decisions framed in this light. While these questions stirred in the high chamber, the quiet rearranging of power continued in ports and boardrooms far away. On a small station near Tau Ceti, a docking manager noticed that a regular cargo line from a human colony had shifted its standard route. It now passed through a minor relay point maintained by a joint human-alien trust instead of stopping only at the big Aegis hub. The reason given was simple. The relay offered better repair service and did not require an extra tithe-linked fee for high-priority docking. In a shipyard orbiting a rocky moon, engineers finished installing a new set of navigation modules on several freighters. The modules carried lantern grid tags as well as Aegis codes, allowing the ships to follow alternate beacon paths if desired. The change did not break any rule. The Coalition had always claimed to support redundancy and safety. Now that value meant that ships could choose which signals to trust. At the edge of Aegis space, a small water world, not unlike Pelagia, reviewed its standing agreements. Its council members sat around a table made of living wood, screens hovering above the surface. They had watched the Pelagia Tragedy with deep concern. They had also watched Evelyn's calm statement about the countdown and the lantern grid. "We rely on Aegis patrols," said one elder, "but we also know that their help is thinner here than in core routes. We already do much of our own protection." A younger planner pointed to a proposal from a human trust offering to help finance a local shelter and navigation node under the grid charter. "This would not remove us from Aegis," she said. "At least not at first. It would simply mean that if we refused a tithe increase, we would still have another source of safety and trade." They voted slowly and quietly. The measure passed by a clear, calm margin. The next day, contracts were signed. Another tiny light of the lantern grid blinked on, not yet full and bright, but real. Back in Seattle, Caleb tracked these changes with a tired but steady satisfaction. He knew that each shift came from choices made by local people, not from orders imposed from Earth. That had been the whole point. The countdown did not grab assets. It invited boards and councils to use options they already had, now that a moral line had been crossed. He checked a timer sitting at the corner of his main display. It did not count down in seconds. It marked cycles and legal milestones. When a pellet supply trust in the outer belt reached its preset date, its charter updated automatically to give lantern-aligned ships best-rate access. When a long-term lease on a string of comm relays hit its review window, the human-led board chose, as planned, not to renew under exclusive Aegis terms. Each change was small enough to avoid the shape of a sudden break. During a break in the Tribunal hearings, Raal closed eyes for a moment in a quiet side room. A small display in the wall showed current route flow across local sectors. The main Aegis line still blazed bright. Traffic was not collapsing. No open rebellion burned anywhere. Yet if Raal looked closely, there were tiny remnants here and there. Faint adjustments, small drops in volume at certain hubs, small increases at others that were not pure Coalition property. A soft tone signaled an incoming private link. It was from an old contact, an alien trader who had known Raal through many negotiations. "Envoy," the trader said, after a short greeting. "I have a simple question that many in my trade circles are now asking. If we must choose between a path that demands a tithe backed by weapons and another path that offers safety through shared agreements and open depots, why should we pick the first buy?" Raal let out a slow breath. "The Aegis path offers proven patrol strength." Raal said, "Our fleets are real. Our response times are documented." "And the other path," the trader pressed gently, "this lantern grid, as they call it. I have seen early nodes already. The shelters are well supplied. The medical kits are top grade. The beacons are clear. They ask for cooperation, not tribute. They do not charge us extra when storms delay us. They will need resources to keep that up." Raal said, "Nothing in space is free. They are setting up slates for voluntary support," the trader replied. "A share of trade profit in exchange for ongoing care, with open accounting. It feels less like tax and more like a co-op. Many of us already use co-ops." The line went quiet for a breath. Then the trader added, "I am not leaving the main lanes yet, but I am watching. Others are watching. The Pelagia deaths have made watching feel like a duty." After the call ended, Raal stood at the viewport and looked out at the assembled ships around the Tribunal station. Most still broadcast Aegis IDs with pride. A few, almost too small to notice, flashed dual tags: Coalition and Lantern. It was a small sign, but it worked on Raal's thoughts the way slow water works on stone. When the Tribunal resumed, Evelyn presented a different kind of evidence. She did not show more accident charts. Instead, she'd brought up copies of Aegis documents that granted humans the right to form long-term trusts and joint boards to manage depots, beacons, and support stations. "These are your rules," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "You wrote them to spread responsibility and to avoid the risk of a single power controlling every asset. You believed that sharing management would build resilience. We agreed. We followed those rules with care. We formed trusts. We funded them. We placed clauses that allowed those trusts to shift their services if the system ever became coercive." Several council members shifted, looking uncomfortable. "You are suggesting," one said, "that you prepared for this from the beginning, even as you joined our network." "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "We trusted your law more than we trusted your promises. We designed for optionality, not for sudden revolt. We hoped we would never need these triggers. Pelagia has shown us that we do." She did not raise her voice on that last sentence, but the weight of it settled across the chamber. Raal found something breaking loose inside. It was not loyalty to Aegis as a whole which still mattered deeply. It was trust in the idea that their system was truly voluntary. If humans had spent centuries planning for a day when they might need to walk away, perhaps they had always sensed a problem that Aegis leaders had refused to see. During the next recess, Raal walked alone down a quiet corridor and stopped at a small public console. Fingers moved almost on their own, calling up the Aegis Charter's oldest sections. The words glowed softly. Mutual defense, shared prosperity, respect for local self-rule, protection without domination. Rahl read those lines with new eyes. Somewhere else, on Earth, and across human systems, people were reading them too. Some saw them as proof that Aegis had simply drifted and could drift back. Others saw them as a sign that the core values had always been at odds with the tithe. In Houston, Caleb watched new lantern nodes flicker online in far sectors. In Seattle, he marked each change in quiet logs. In many small rooms across different species space, trade councils met and asked themselves a simple question: how much did they really need the old toll roads now that other paths were becoming real? The true shape of the countdown was now visible, at least to those who knew where to look. It was not a single event. It was a slow transfer of leverage from a central power to a distributed network of local choices. It was physical, in the form of stations and beacons. It was legal, in the form of contracts and trusts. It was social, in the form of traders and families, deciding which routes felt more fair. No shots were fired, no fleets clashed. Yet bit by bit, the tools the coalition had long relied on to keep others dependent began to lose their force. A demonstration strike had lit a flare in Pelagia's sky. The countdown answered with a different light, far dimmer at first, but spread over many points. In the Tribunal hall, as Evelyn prepared to give her next statement, and Royale prepared to respond, the first real question of the new balance settled unspoken between them. Not whether Aegis could still use power, but whether using it in the old way would now start to leave them standing on emptier roads, watching as more and more travelers chose a quieter, freer way between the stars. The final day of the Tribunal began with an odd stillness. Outside the station, ships moved along their careful paths, but traffic around the main Aegis docks was a little lighter than usual. Some captains had delayed departures. Some had shifted to nearby relay ports run by joint trusts. No route had closed, yet the flow had changed, like a river that had found a second channel. Inside the great chamber, delegates took their seats with a kind of quiet strain. Everyone knew that. On the surface, the Tribunal would end with findings about the Pelagia strike. Who was to blame? What reparations would be paid? Which procedures would be changed? But under that surface, another question pressed on every mind. What place would the Aegis coalition hold in a galaxy that now had another real option? Rahl Sith sat at the Aegis bench, hands folded, listening as the presiding counselor reviewed the case summary. The words came in calm, practiced tones, data lag, weakened struts, legal authorization for demonstration action, untended loss of life, recommendations scrolled onto shared screens, tighter rules for such strikes, new checks for occupancy, more frequent updates from local logs. When the counselor finished, a formal hush settled. "We have heard the facts," the presiding voice said. "We have assigned responsibility and proposed reforms. Before we move to final vote, we will hear closing statements. Ambassador Evelyn Shaw of Earth, you have the floor." Evelyn's form appeared in the center of the chamber, clear as if she were standing there in person. She wore the same simple dark suit, the same small balance pin at the collar. Behind her on the feed, a window in Washington showed green trees moving in a light wind. Members of the council, she began, people of Pelagia, and citizens of all systems who have watched these hearings, I thank you for your time. Her voice held no trace of triumph. It carried sadness and care, but also a steady core that did not bend. We accept the Tribunal's finding that the Pelagia strike followed your written procedure, she said. We acknowledge the changes you have now suggested to reduce the risk of similar accidents. These steps may save lives in the future. That matters. She paused, letting that small recognition settle before she moved on. But I must repeat, she continued, what has guided us from the first day after the strike. The problem is not only the flaw in execution. The problem is the idea that debt can ever justify a weapons fire against a peaceful station. As long as that is allowed in your system, the word protection in your protection tithe will not match the reality. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their screens. Others stared straight ahead, faces controlled. For centuries, Evelyn went on, humans have lived within the Aegis framework. We joined early patrols. We paid tithes, we served on your boards. Along the way, we used the rights your own laws gave us. We formed trusts. We set up shared depots. We built beacons and shelters under joint charters. We did this not as a secret plot, but as a long-term act of self-respect. She brought up a set of documents, their headers clearly marked as Aegis-approved charters and agreements. These texts are yours as much as ours, she said. They say that local entities may manage key assets for the good of all travelers. They say that no species may be forced to give up its ability to provide for its own safety. We took those words very seriously. We designed the countdown inside that space you gave us. Ral watched faces around the ring, a cautious respect from some human allied worlds, a sharp anger from a few hardline Aegis members, a thoughtful, wary interest from many others. Today, Evelyn said, the countdown reaches a clear point. Enough assets have shifted. Enough routes have adjusted, compacts. The lantern grid is no longer a plan. It is a working network. She gestured slightly, and a three-dimensional map appeared in the chamber air. It showed Aegis routes in white, as before, but now another set of lines glowed in soft gold. They were thinner in many places, still forming a looser web. But they were real. Small nodes shone at crossings, shelters, medical stations, and repair docks under the grid's charter. These are not human outposts alone, she said. Look closely, and you will see stations run by mixed boards. You will see shelters funded by 3 or 4 species together. You will see beacons maintained by crews who have agreed, in writing, never to tie access to a tithe. In quiet ports across many systems, people watched this image appear on their own screens. On Pelagia, families gathered in floating halls saw their own worlds, new lantern-linked shelter, wink softly on the map. On a dusty mining moon, workers in a mess hall pointed out a tiny gold node that matched the joint depot they had just voted to join. Evelyn turned her gaze back to the council ring. "We now offer a choice," she said, "to the Aegis Coalition, and to every world that moves ships between stars." Her words were simple, but for Raal, they felt like a door swinging, fully open. "Choice is the heart of safety," she continued. "A person, a colony, a species is never truly safe if saying no means facing guns or losing all ways to trade and travel. Real safety means optionality. It means that if a system turns coercive, there is another path, another signal in the dark." She let the golden lines hang there, touching but not erasing the white Aegis roots. "So here is the choice, stated as clearly as I can," she said. "End the protection tithe as a required payment tied to military enforcement. Replace it with a voluntary support model with open accounting and no weapon-backed penalties. Accept full accountability for past harm, starting with Pelagia. Join the Lantern Grid as equals, sharing in its costs, its work and its benefits. If you do this, we will gladly keep using many of your routes. We will share patrol duties. We will respect your councils and invite you into ours." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes had a strong, steady light. "If you refuse," she said, "then Aegis will remain what it is now, a toll system backed by force. We will not attack you. We will not try to break your lanes. We will simply continue what we have started. We will route more trade through grid paths. We will grow our own safety net. We will help others do the same. Over time, more travelers will choose the roads that do not charge them under threat. You may keep your tolls. You may find you have fewer and fewer people willing to pay." Silence stretched across the chamber. The presiding counselor opened mouth to speak, then closed it again. The choice was clear. It did not need more words. Raal felt many years of training push toward a familiar defense. To talk about order, about the dangers of pirates, about the risks of fragmentation. Yet, those arguments now felt thinner than they once had. He had seen the grid nodes. He had heard from traders who trusted their local boards more than distant fleets. He had watched humans use law, not guns, to shift the ground under old power. When his turn came for a final response, Raal stood slowly and let the room see that this was not an easy moment. "Ambassador Shaw," he began, "and citizens of Pelagia, first, I say this as a person before I speak as an envoy. The Aegis Coalition failed you. We failed to see that a practice meant to show power had become a form of danger by itself. We failed to see that the word protection cannot survive long beside a weapon fired for late payment." Some on Raal's own bench glanced over in shock. Such direct admission was not common in this chamber. As an envoy, Raal went on, "I cannot speak alone for the whole coalition. That will take many votes and much debate. But I can say this: the Lantern Grid is not a threat to Aegis in the way old enemies were. It is a mirror. It reflects our own values back to us and shows where we have turned aside from them." Raal brought up the same ancient charter lines read in the quiet room earlier. Mutual defense, shared prosperity, respect for local self-rule. These were our promises, Raal said. If we now choose to defend a tithe, that depends on strikes like Pelagia's, rather than to return to these promises, then we will deserve whatever loss of trust follows. Across the mesh, many who had never heard Aegis representatives speak with such honesty sat up straighter. I will argue within the council, Rahl said, that we must accept your offer, that we must end the enforced tithe and join your grid as true partners, not owners. I do not know if I will succeed. There are many who fear loss of control more than they fear the slow loss of respect. If we fail, he said quietly, and Aegis chooses the old path, I will still carry this lesson. Power that must flash weapons to collect fees is already weaker than it looks. Power that comes from patient trust and shared work may be quieter, but it lasts. Presiding councilor called for a recess before final votes. Delegates streamed out into side rooms, their voices low and tense. News feeds carry clips of Evelyn's clear offer and Rahl's unusual answer. The word spread fast through trade networks, colonies, and ship crews. In a repair bay orbiting a far world, a mechanic watched the clip while checking a freighter's hull. So they finally said it out loud, she muttered to a co-worker. We do not have to stick with just the toll roads anymore. In a family home on Pelagia, waves lapping gently at the floating walls, a parent replayed the moment Evelyn said choice and optionality, and felt something inside loosen like a knot finally untied. In Seattle, Caleb Park looked up from his screens as a soft alert chimed. The countdown clock he monitored had reached its key mark. Formal public offer delivered, tribunal record complete, grid coverage passing the planned minimum threshold. A gentle light turned from amber to green, not with fanfare, but with quiet confirmation. The long plan had reached the point where no single reversal could undo it. The Aegis Council did not decide everything in a day. It never had. Old systems rarely jump. They shift. In the weeks that followed, reports came in piece by piece. Some hardline blocks refused any change, calling the grid a dangerous dilution of authority. But others, especially those from frontier worlds that did much of their own protection already, pushed for compromise. They proposed a phased end to mandatory tithes, starting in sectors where lantern coverage was strongest. They suggested joint oversight committees for both Aegis patrols and grid shelters. They offered to open accounting for security funding so that any voluntary contribution would be tracked and justified. Evelyn and other human envoys engaged with these moves quietly. They did not gloat. They pressed gently when old habits tried to reinsert hidden penalties. They kept repeating a simple measure. Could a small colony say no to an extra payment without fearing a visit from a warship? There were setbacks. Some proposals failed by narrow votes. Some old commanders tried to prove that Aegis was still in full control by sending extra patrols through grid-heavy regions, hoping to scare traders back into pure coalition lines. Instead, those displays often pushed more captains to test the new golden routes. Through it all, life for ordinary people slowly became easier. On Pelagia, fuel shipments once again left the orbiting refinery, now repaired with help from both Aegis funds and grid support crews. But the refinery no longer sat under the shadow of demonstration strikes. Its new charter signed by local leaders and grid boards, forbade any use of the station as a target to enforce payments. If any larger power tried to claim that right, automatic clauses would redirect the station's services through alternate networks. Families there still remembered the dead with quiet circles of light. At each memorial, they also read a short passage from the Tribunal record where Evelyn had named what happened as wrong and where Rahl had agreed. Children grew up knowing that their grief had helped change something far beyond their world. Across human space and in the systems of many allies, Lantern Grid shelters opened their doors to travelers. A lone freighter that suffered a drive failure on a long haul no longer had to beg for help from passing warships. It could aim for the nearest grid node, where it would find basic supplies, medical kits, and comm links already stocked. Payment would be a fair share of its future profit, not a crushing fee or a permanent mark of debt. In some sectors, Aegis patrols and grid support teams began to work side by side. At first, there was suspicion. Old habits do not vanish overnight. But after a few joint rescues and shared repairs, the people who did the real work, engineers, medics, tug pilots, found they had more in common with each other than with distant power games. A pirate band that once preyed on weak lanes near a poor world tried to test a new order. They hit a small grid-aligned station, expecting that Aegis would stay away from a network it disliked. Instead, the call for help went out on both sets of frequencies. A lantern-flagged tug responded first, followed by an Aegis patrol that chose, in that moment, to act by the older, better lines of its own charter rather than by anger at human plans. The pirates were driven off. The station survived. The rescued crews later told the story in simple terms. Two groups had worked together without asking for tribute first. Years later, historians would point to such moments as proof that the shift had not destroyed order. It had changed who held the main levers and how. For Evelyn Shaw, the change felt less like a sharp break and more like a long, slow exhale. She continued to serve as an ambassador for some time, but her days grew quieter. She spent more hours in Earth's gardens, in meeting rooms that smelled of soil and leaves rather than polished metal. Sometimes she walked along a path beside a small pond where children played near the water and old people sat under trees. Families here spoke of space travel the way earlier generations had spoken of long-distance rail or flight, important but no longer strange. Routes had become normal, and for many, the idea that they should be free of threat had become normal as well. On a bench overlooking the pond, Caleb Park joined her one afternoon. He looked a little older, lines of tired work around his eyes. But there was a softness there that had not been present during the tense days of the Tribunal. How does it look from Seattle now? How does it look from Seattle now? Evelyn asked, watching ducks glide across the water. Quiet, Caleb said. In a good way. The maps show more grid paths than ever. Aegis routes are still there, but they now carry clear labels for where tithes are voluntary. Traders pay when they see value. When they do not, they choose other routes. Any sign of new demonstration strikes. Any sign of new demonstration strikes, Evelyn asked. though she already knew the answer. Caleb shook his head. The Tribunal's reforms plus public opinion have made that tool almost impossible to use. Every commander knows that a single shot could drive another wave of worlds out of the old system. The cost is too high. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "Do you ever wish we had pushed harder, faster?" Caleb asked softly. "That we had tried to break the tithe in a single bold move." Long ago, Evelyn watched the ripples move outward from the duck's wake. "No," she said. "Sudden breaks lead. Sudden breaks lead to fear. Fear leads to war. We wanted a world where people could choose a better path without having to see everything they know burn first. That takes time. Patience was not a delay. It was the tool, far from Earth, in a calm way station that served both Aegis and grid routes. Raal Sith sat at a small table, facing a wide window. Outside, ships came and went, their tags showing a mix of affiliations. Some still flew pure Coalition colors, others showed lantern icons. Many carried both. Raal no longer served as primary envoy. After the Tribunal, some in Aegis leadership had grown uneasy with the open criticism he had voiced, and he had stepped into a different role. Some in Aegis stepped into a different role, working on joint safety councils between patrols and grid nodes. It was less prestigious, perhaps, but more honest. An information screen on the wall played a quiet loop of updates, new stations joining the grid, sectors where tithes had become voluntary, councils where Aegis and local boards had agreed on mixed funding. A young clerk from a species new to interstellar travel sat down nearby, clearly nervous. "Is it true," the clerk asked shyly, "that you were in the room when the humans started this countdown thing?" Ra smiled faintly. "The countdown started long before I arrived in that chamber," he said. "It began in quiet offices, in meetings where no one raised their voice, in signatures on forms that looked very dull. I was there when they told us what it all meant." "And you were not angry?" the clerk asked. "That they had planned so far without telling you?" Raal thought about that for a long moment. "At first, I felt caught off guard," he admitted. "We had assumed we understood the limits of their patience. We were wrong, but anger did not last. In time, I felt something closer to relief. They showed us a way to step back from a kind of power that had begun to rot us from inside, without dragging us through war." The clerk looked out at the ships. "It seems calmer now," they said. "Not perfect, but calmer. Power grounded in fear always shakes," Raal said. "It must be proven again and again. Power grounded in shared choice can stand still and let others come to it. That is what you see. Rotes that exist because people keep choosing them, not because they are forced." As the station cycled to local night, small lights came on along the outer ring. In the distance, a new lantern beacon flared to full strength for the first time, its soft signal joining the long list of paths people could take. Across the galaxy, many did not notice its first light. They slept or worked or cared for families. Ships moved quietly, guided by charts that now held more than one safe way forward. Somewhere a child studied a map for school and did not know that, Only a few generations earlier, those lines had all belonged to a single gatekeeper. The countdown, in the end, had not been a bomb. It had been a clock that measured how long it would take for patience, ethics, and coordination to outweigh habit and fear. When it reached zero, nothing exploded. Instead, something lit up. Lanterns at depots and shelters. Screens with clear choices. Hearts that no longer tightened every time a tithe. Notice arrived with a faint shadow of implied threat. Evelyn on Earth, Caleb in his quiet halls of data, Ryle at a joint way station. They all lived to see that softer dawn. None of them were celebrated as grand heroes. They were remembered, if at all, as steady hands and calm voices in a time when it would have been easy to shout. That was fitting. The change they had helped shape did not belong to any single person or species. It belonged to the idea that strength does not need to roar to be real, that law and kindness can carry as much weight as fleets when given enough time, and that a galaxy of toll roads can, with care, patience, and shared work, become a lantern-lit grid of real choices instead.